Quinton in Fargo. Hey, Quinton, how's it going?
Hey, guys, I'm doing okay. How about you?
Doing all right. Having some great conversations. Would love to hear what you want to talk to us about.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk. Start off, I'm an atheist. And I wanted to talk about the Kalam cosmological argument and the equivocation fallacy that I think it commits.
Okay.
Just by what I said, do you guys have any idea of what I'm about to say? Because, if we're just going to be talking about a bunch of stuff we already kind of know about, then I'd love to give more time to the next caller.
Well, I think this show, we don't talk too much. I mean, apologetics definitely comes up. This definitely isn't a super apologetics-focused show. But if you want to kind of I think the three of us could probably surmise what the Kalam cosmological is and how creates that equivocation fallacy. But, you're already on the call with us. You've been waiting. Go ahead and give us your take, and I'd love to hear it. Maybe we can make it a bit of a shorter call, but, I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so the equivocation fallacy that comes in, I'll just read the argument. So it's two premises and one conclusion. So premise one, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise two, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore, the universe had a cause. And, they'll go, most apologists will go off and they'll talk about how that universe, the causation for the universe must be God, right? Immaterial, timeless, spaceless, etc. But my equivocation fallacy kind of problem that I see is within premise one and two with the phrase begins to exist. Because we can take a look at the world around us and we can ask ourselves, well, what does it mean to begin to exist? Because premise one and premise two are clearly meaning two different things. Begins to exist in premise two, most apologists will argue creation ex nihilo, right? Creation from nothing.
Sure, yeah.
And when we're talking about creation from nothing, we're talking about a literal lack of attributes. We're not just talking about, the lack of air molecules in a bell jar, right? That's not nothing because there's still space and time.
Yes.
Yeah. And so when they argue for the universe beginning to exist in that sense, one could argue that it's completely nonsensical, but this isn't what we see, things beginning to exist in the real world, and that's not what they mean in premise one.
Yes.
In premise one, what we see is beginning to exist, meaning a reconstruction of what has already existed.
Yes. We've never witnessed, you and I have never witnessed something beginning to exist, right? Because at least in the sense they mean, because we're always seeing other things turn into other things. Yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah, and the best way that, people can see this, and, with apologists like William Lane Craig, right? I mean, he can present this argument with such bravado and, class and all of the scientific arguments that he thinks support it. He can present it with all of these pieces of evidence and arguments for it. But even he will admit to this. He'll kind of shroud it with, the way he says it, because he'll say things along the lines of, did I not begin to exist? I clearly didn't exist at one point. But he strategically leaves out the fact that, well, William Lane Craig and you and I came from a sperm and egg, which previously existed, in other people's bodies and were reconstructed over time through nutrients and just growth of a typical human.
Yes. And we're the result of all the food we've ever eaten, which explains a lot about how I look. But,
look great.
It's matter. It's all, stuff we can actually point to, right?
Yeah. And right away, I mean, besides the fact that this argument, doesn't end with, therefore God exists. This is probably the easiest way to point out, a giant problem with the Kalam, because it does conflate this idea of beginning to exist. And any example that they try and give of something coming from nothing is just going to end up being the universe, and then you're just begging the question.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and this argument is super tricky. It is very, very tricky if you're not paying too close attention because it can sound pretty convincing. But like if you were doing what we're doing exactly right now, where we're really looking at the terms, right? We're really looking at the definitions of what we mean when we say we begin to exist, and all this other kinds of stuff, then it really doesn't hold as much water as it would for some people. The Kalam cosmological arguments was one of the first real apologetics I ever heard. And I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, there's something that doesn't quite sound right about this argument, but I couldn't quite figure this out. And I remember looking this up and and that was one of my first exposure to some atheist videos, was people kind of breaking this particular argument down. Because if you think about it too much there's something that's not quite right about it. I don't know if you had experience with this argument when you were a believer, Mr. Bear, or if it was ever part of your background at all.
No, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought this one up because there's two main things about this one. And you're quite right. When it says one, whatever begins to exist, it falls apart straight away. It's just incredible how that just collapses. And the whole thing is with William Lane Craig, which I'm glad you mentioned, is that he rephrases the whole thing to say the universe has a cause. It's just an assumption. So I'm so glad you brought this one up because the whole thing just collapses upon itself like a demolition. It's incredible how this one just comes apart. And like you say, Dan, it's when you hear it, it's very convincing how it's worded. But when you stop and read and think and reason, you go, well, point one falls apart straight away. So
yeah, and picture
it's
this.
Crazy.
Picture this. You're in an apologetics class. You're with other people who's trying to figure this stuff out. You're already pressured to believe what the people are telling you are saying because you're in a class and you're trying to pass, right? And so you may not be as equipped to think as critically about this kinds of stuff. And that's not a slight against people who are taking these kinds of classes or trying to figure this stuff out or hearing this stuff for the first time, but rather an explanation to look at why people are really convinced by this argument. Because when you're hearing this stuff, chances are it's maybe in the context of a Christian gathering, and you're not as primed to be as skeptical about this kind of stuff.
It makes you nod along. Yeah. That's right. That's true. Yeah. Okay. True. God exists.
Yeah, exactly. So definitely something worth investigating, but you have to have the right minds and people looking at this kind of stuff. So Quinton, I'm really glad that you brought it up today. And I hopefully, maybe this is somebody's first time hearing this and wondering why this argument doesn't make sense. I think maybe you put it into a great explanation of why it doesn't. So thanks for doing that with us.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, well, thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your night here. It's so funny. I'm a little rusty on my apologetics stuff. Matt Dillahunt, he's kind of been looking at me, glaring at me for some of the stuff I've been saying tonight. But it's just not. It's almost like I've been done with it for a while. You know what I mean? And when I go up to it, it's like going back to an old gravesite of like, oh yeah, this is where this idea died for me. You know what I mean? Yeah. And here's why it died.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing new, is there? It starts to spin around a little bit in a rinse cycle.
It's not, it may be not new for us, but there's always going to be people encountering this stuff for the first time. I mean, it's going to happen every single day.
Yeah.
And it is worth talking about and examining because, like Dean was saying, hey, when was the last time you thought about this stuff? Right? Are you still critically thinking about this stuff? And I totally am. At least I think I am. Maybe for Dean, I'm not thinking enough, but